Greetings, YouTube. This is Remarkable Republican, here to bring you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. I just finished watching Season 1 of a Japan cartoon called Full Metal Alchemist. This is from a variant of that show called Brotherhood. For whatever reason, the Japanese like to make multiple versions of the same show, just like they did with Dragon Ball Z and some other stuff. So I'll be reviewing the first season, and what I'm really trying to get at in all this is that the show doesn't quite make sense, and that America should keep making cartoons rather than outsourcing that to Japan. Full Metal Alchemist is a show set in a universe where you have a decent amount of technology. It's supposed to be around 1915, so think right around the time of World War II. So technology is not what it is now, but it's still not like the Middle Ages or anything like that. And you should have somewhat of an equality between magic and technology. They should be able to fight each other on somewhat equal footing, but in this universe, magic is clearly superior. And that means that whoever made this show doesn't really understand how those two things work together or can compete. And so the show's not as interesting as it could be. There are also some other problems here. Another is that for magic to truly be powerful, if you understand the lore of magic, you have to have your body involved. Your body is a conduit for magic, so a disembodied spirit or someone missing a couple of limbs should have their power limited, much like, say, Darth Vader. Another thing is that not everyone has equal access or ability with alchemy. And given the rules that are explained in the show, it doesn't really make sense why some are more powerful than others. There's not really a reason. There's also not a stated reason for why some people have the power and other people don't have it at all. So none of this is explained or anything. And again, I think that you have to have magic versus technology as the main plot if you're setting it in this period. You could make the argument that magic is fading away and being pushed aside by technology. But that's not really where they're going with this. So for instance, they could fight tanks or something like that, barely survive, and then realize, okay, well, if these tanks get any better, we're screwed, but they don't do that. So whoever made this clearly never played Final Fantasy III for Super Nintendo, which kind of does this and does it much better. Another thing about the background of Full Metal Alchemist that doesn't make a whole lot of sense is that we have a kingdom, a Mistress, but the ruler is not a king, but rather a Führer king, and his name is Bradley. So, first of all, Bradley is not a very regal name. It's not exactly a name from the Middle Ages. The other thing is, why not just have him be King Bradley? Why Führer king? What is a Führer king? You could be a Führer or you could be a king. If you're a Führer or a Führer king, you would also think, okay, well, this is some sort of an ethno-state. But the problem with Bradley is that while he has a white person name, if you look at him, he's clearly either half Asian or half Arab. And yet most of his subjects are blonde or whatever. So this is not an ethno-state, unless it is a very broad ethno-state, which they don't explain. So he should just be King Bradley. And then we'll just leave it at that. But or Führer Bradley. And then make it a military government, which it kind of is. But don't call him Führer King, because then that just creates confusion. And maybe this was a translation issue. Maybe the person who translated this doesn't know English very well and doesn't know history or whatever. The other thing is, in the show, the only parts of the government we meet are state alchemists, people who are like our two main heroes we'll talk about in a minute, both of whom work more like private detectives for the most part. And then you also have the military, which mostly does the same thing, except they also do some more policing. And they also tend to use guns rather than pure magic, although some of the people in the military are also alchemists. So it's not really clear where the military begins and ends. And when we combine that with the fact that we're not really sure what this ruler is supposed to be, or what the system of government is supposed to be, it again looks like they really didn't think this out very much. And since this is at least the second time they've recorded the show, you would think they'd go back and edit some stuff and make sure this made sense, but they didn't. So, yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of very popular fiction revolves around having terrible mentor figures. In Star Wars, of course, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, the self-centered, condescending guy who uses riddles to try to teach. And in Full Metal Alchemist, you have a teacher who's so bad they don't even give her a name. They simply address her as teacher. And maybe there's something that pops up with her name, but it's so brief, and the name is so weirdly spelled that it's meaningless. Not to mention that people just call her teacher, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, this anonymous woman teacher is an Asian housewife. She has a fat husband, and she is not commissioned as a state alchemist. So she's going to teach them how to be state alchemists without being good enough to be one herself. Makes sense to me. And also, she's clearly older and more experienced than the two of them. They're in their early teens. She's an adult female. So in theory, she should be better at this and should be the one with the commission, but instead she isn't. And she also has a lot of weird things about her. So not only is she very temperamental, but she also failed to convey a lot of really important lessons. So she never told them about the dangers that led them to lose their bodies. She also is someone who goes between being bedridden and then being invincible in battle. So she goes back and forth in ways that don't make sense. So she's either on the verge of death or she's invincible. And she just goes back and forth for no real reason. Also, as a teacher, she can't really be very effective because she's got the bad temper. And worst of all, she has never heard the saying that there are no bad students, only bad teachers. So everything that her students do wrong, she blames on them rather than using it as a teachable moment. So she is an even worse teacher than Obi-Wan Kenobi. Full Metal Alchemist is a show with a large cast of characters, and it only gets larger as the show goes on. For now, I'll just talk about the people I'm familiar with from Season 1 and how they've been presented so far. I haven't seen all of this, so maybe things change, but I don't know. So, the Elric brothers, Ed and Alf, are the two kind of central characters, with Ed being the biggest. Now, Ed is actually one of the smallest characters physically. His main trait is that he's short. So he's 15, but he's about the size of a 10-year-old. And because of that, he's deeply insecure and loses his temper easily when people point out how small he is. And you might think this would be something that he could grow out of or overlook because of his other extraordinary powers, but he's just obsessed with the issue and lets people trigger him all the time. His brother Alf is a lot more chill, even though he's literally a soul stuck in a suit of armor. And Alf, by the way, is creepy. So imagine a massive, 7-foot suit of armor from the Middle Ages that's fully animated and moves around, and the voice that comes out of it is a prepubescent boy, a little squeaker. It's extraordinarily unsettling. And if anything, Alf would have made great sense as a bad guy. Or the show would be so much cooler if he had betrayed Ed early on, and then we have the Battle of the Brothers. Their best friend, and the girl that both of them seem to have some sort of crush on, is named Winfrey. And she's a mechanic, so she fixes their armor when they need help. Unfortunately, even though she's supposed to be, I guess, the love interest of the whole show, she is flatter than a pancake. And so that is a little bit odd. Not to mention that because all the women in the show are super flat, if you see a man who's kind of effeminate, it's very hard to tell the difference between a man and a woman in this show. Another character is Winfrey's grandma, simply called Grandma. She doesn't really do anything in the show except she cooks sometimes, she's old, and she likes to sew. We also know that there's a lot of affection, but we don't really know exactly why or if they have any jokes between themselves or anything like that. There's also Major Anderson, who is an army officer and a friend of them. He's also an alchemist. He is a big homosexual. He has a weird look to him. He's got like a baby curl in front with no other hair, and then he's got a big mustache. So he looks like if you had a Victorian bodybuilder / boxer, and then you bred him with a Gerber baby and made it instantly an adult and a gay, then that's what you would get with Major Anderson. As for the other Army officers, there is Lieutenant Colonel Mays Hughes, who has a girl's name, is probably gay even though he's married, and can't fight. So he will die really easily at the hands of a villain, even though he's supposed to be a high-ranking officer with some skills, but apparently he was good at paperwork and not fighting. There's also Colonel Mustang, who's supposed to be a cool character, and he's a ladies' man and he's super chill and all that, but because his only power is fire, he can't fight in the rain. So he's a little bit limited purpose. So these are the main heroes of Full Metal Alchemist. This season really doesn't fit together because we get the introduction of the characters, their quest to get their bodies back, and we also see them at work. And their work at first is to deal with freaks and weirdos. Again, they're kind of like private detectives who go around looking for people abusing alchemy. So, there's one old pervert researcher they investigate and they meet. They stay at his house while trying to do research on something else, and they make friends with his young daughter and her dog. And so they become friends, and this guy is also a fellow alchemist, but he is not a guy who goes out in the field. He's more of an experimenter. And so they find out a day or so later that he's taken his daughter and her dog and created a hybrid homunculus. So he sacrificed his own flesh and blood, and he apparently also sacrificed his wife earlier. His motive for all of this was to keep his status and show that he's a great alchemist. And so this is a weird motive, and of course it's disgusting, and they have to deal with this. Then we're introduced to some more disturbing bad guys, some alchemists who have gone rogue and are maybe like rebels. We're not really sure what they are, but they are biblically inspired in some way. They take on names like the 7 deadly sins, so we meet envy, gluttony, lust, and I believe more of them will come later in the show. But the point is that we don't really know exactly who they are or where they came from. All we know is that they are not a part of the government and that they are not friends of the Elrics. They're also pretty powerful. So the researcher who creates the homunculus is not a physical threat, although he does effectively destroy his family. But these new bad guys who emerge are a threat. And they just kind of show up and start messing with the Elrics. The main bad guy of Season 1, the big bad if you will, is a man whose name we don't actually know, but everyone calls him Scar because he has a very distinctive scar on his face. He doesn't really come from anywhere in particular, he just kind of emerges. He has no stated or clear motive, and he's super powerful. So he will absolutely wreck Ed and Alf. And they almost die, and then they have to go get repairs from Winfrey. And even after she fixes them up, they don't train in order to improve. It's also frustrating because Ed clearly likes Winfrey, but he doesn't use this opportunity to try to get with her. So effectively, they just get the shit kicked out of them, and nothing else happens. And then they just sit around and mope, and don't try to get stronger or better. There's another fight later, where Lieutenant Colonel Hughes has to fight Scar, and he quickly gets destroyed. So he dies very easily. And a lot of that's because his allies don't know how to use teamwork. So even though he's an officer and he's supposed to be commanding people to coordinate like a military, they don't really know what to do. He doesn't know how to command. And so he dies. And now his wife will have to go find someone else to beard for. Perhaps Major Anderson, who otherwise is a very clear homosexual. So that's effectively where Season 1 ends. It just kind of ends randomly. Hughes is dead. There's a funeral. Everybody's sad. Our heroes are still not sure who Scar is or where he went. All they know is that he's very bad. They still haven't found the Sorcerer's Stone. Everything is up in the air. And so that is where Full Metal Alchemist ends. And I'll have to see where the story goes from here. But so far what I'm getting is that the Japanese don't understand story structure. Because each season of a show should have a bad guy who's then defeated, and then you move on to another challenge. But in this case, it's just a cliffhanger, and then the story will continue in Season 2 without any resolution of what's happened so far. So, again, American cartoonists need to step up their game and save people from having to turn to Japan cartoons.